Welcome back to Sunrise as we continue this Hope Day Wednesday. Now, South Africa has sunk into a recession. Now, yesterday, Statistics South Africa released its latest GDP results, and it indicated that the country's GDP fell by 0.7%. Now, here to tell us more why we should be worried about that and how it will affect me and you is portfolio manager Byron Lotter. Good morning to you, and thanks for joining us, Byron.
Good morning.
Okay, so now there's words that have been thrown around. Let's just maybe get to that. Technical recession versus recession. Exactly what is it and where are we?
Well, the definition of a recession is if you have 2 quarters in a row of slowing growth, which we've just experienced because the quarter before this, we also saw a decline. So this is the first time we've had 2 quarters in a row since the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And we've had a few quarters of decline, but then the next quarter we've seen some sort of recovery. The bad news here is that we were expecting a decent recovery this quarter, growth of 0.9%. So it's a massive swing of 1.6% to a 0.7% decline.
Okay. All right. So now, I mean, why should consumers obviously have very concern? And should they be concerned, and what is it that they're supposed to be doing?
I think certainly, because when you actually delve into the numbers a little deeper, you'll see that the primary sector, which is agricultural and mining, actually showed some decent growth. And we know that because it's coming off quite a low base, especially the farming of last year's drought. The big decline we saw was in trade and retail and the services sector. I think in terms of clothing and shoes purchases declined 12% for the quarter.
So like, I think Edcon is like looking at shutting down some stores.
So Stutterford's going bankrupt, going under. Edcon maybe not too far behind. We've seen it in a lot of the share prices. Yesterday, most SA Inc. stocks, South Africa-focused stocks, were hit quite heavily.
So these are some of the big implications for like businesses. But let's talk about like small businesses and investors. How will they be affected?
Well, there's a severe lack of confidence at the moment. And of course, we've had the ratings agencies breathing down our necks. And one of the big things ratings agencies look at is debt to GDP. Now that we've got GDP coming down, that ratio increases without even our debt increasing. So it's certainly going to wake the ratings agencies up again in terms of downgrades and so on. And then, of course, as you say, confidence in businesses, lack of investment, the banking's sort of appetite to lend out to these kind of businesses decreases. So there's massive knock-on effects all over. It doesn't mean that next quarter we can't show some sort of growth. You know, the Reserve Bank still believes we will grow by close to 1% this year. So we do need a couple of big quarters following this quarter. And you do see that sometimes. It doesn't necessarily mean next quarter is going to be terrible. But unfortunately, expectations were for some decent growth this quarter because we've seen positive rainfall and we had some sort of stability before the big cabinet reshuffle that happened a few months ago.
Okay, so what is do you think the recent downgradings had any impact on this recession?
I think so, definitely, because again, it's a confidence thing. If you expecting a tough economy and you don't expect your salary to increase, you might not go to Woolies and buy that Trenery jacket, or you, especially on your credit card, or if you've got an account with Trueworths or something, you're not going to go and take those risks. So that's exactly what we're seeing in the economy. Ironically, though, communication grew by 5%, so people are still willing to spend money on airtime and communicate and post pictures on Facebook. So obviously people have priorities, but definitely pulling back on a lot of the discretionary spending type things.
Okay, so there's a talk of like we need to improve growth in like certain sectors, for example, trade, catering, accommodation. Okay, they showed a lot of like, negative contribution. How can that sort of like be turned around?
Well, the problem in South Africa, and we saw this last week when unemployment numbers came through, there's a huge unemployment rate in South Africa, 27%, which is shocking. And we also got massive inequalities and quite a small middle class. So what we need is a growing middle class. So not necessarily the existing middle class buying more clothes. We need people entering that economy and being able to afford such things, getting jobs and being able to go to Mr. Price and buying clothes and certain soft luxury items. That's what we need. And that's where the sort of political unrest is coming from, and it's a huge gap that we need to cover. So it's not just growing the existing middle class, it's or growing the existing middle class growing spending. It's actually growing that pool of people that can afford to live that kind of lifestyle.
Okay, so the uncertainty around leadership and sort of like, concern around the possible, these new policy talks that are going around, new, catchphrases being thrown around and all of that. How do you think that sort of like brought us here, and what can be done to sort of like change the current situation?
Well, first of all, the lack of investment in uncertain times, because you cannot really trust the situation at the moment. And then the kind of rot that comes through from the top, through government. A lot of the spending that needs to be done is there to enhance the people, to enhance and be able to grow middle classes. Also incentivize small businesses to start employing people. So those kind of things just are not happening. There's no trust in the system. The government's not playing its role. Of course, we've got issues with Eskom. We saw electricity supply had come down. That was one of the reasons for the pullback in GDP. And yesterday, Eskom announced that they want to increase tariffs by 20%. How are businesses, how are people going to cope with that kind of increase? So instead of going out and possibly starting a business or at least consuming goods, they're now putting more money into just staying warm and keeping their house connected to the grid. So, this is unnecessary spending, and that delves deeper into the waste that Eskom have been, doing in terms of paying too much for coal because they're buying from a mine that has connections to the government,
So, talking about the government, the Minister of Finance has got a lot to do, especially in his to-do, entry.
Yes, welcome to the job.
So, where should exactly he start, and how can he sort of like inject some mindset shift and to get things going in this regard?
Well, he's got a very tough job, because obviously he's got to be allocating funds to certain sectors, but he's also got to know that those funds that he's allocating are getting spent properly and being allocated to where they're supposed to. He's also got to keep on creating confidence. He's gone on a few road shows. He's got to speak to the ratings agencies and make sure that South Africa can constantly repay its debt. It's very difficult to be raising debt and have the ability to repay it if you're not growing. GDP growth would solve so many of our problems, and along with that, create employment. So
what can I do right now as the Minister of Finance in my house, like, for the ordinary South African, what can they do?
Well, it is very difficult. He needs to continue to be prudent and follow in Pravin Gordhan's footsteps. Pravin Gordhan was very prudent in terms of saying no to certain requests on spending, because we cannot increase our debt to GDP when our GDP is not growing. We cannot increase spending if there's not more money coming into the system. So he needs to be a bit stingy with his funds.
Okay, so